Hey everybody, Mrs. Peterson here, and today we're going to talk about the second part of the photography golden triangle, and that is shutter speed, okay? So this is going to be a fun one. What is shutter speed? Well, first we talked about exposure, and it has to do with how much light is into the camera, right? But if you're in manual mode, you can you can control how much light enters the camera in three different ways. We already learned about the first one, which is the depth of field, right? Which has um, the f-stops in front of it. And today we're going to work on the second one, which is shutter speed. Here we go. The Photographic Golden Triangle is composed of three different camera settings. You can change your camera to adjust how your camera will compose an image. The second portion, of course, I just said, is the shutter speed, and the other ones is ISO and aperture, which we've already gone over. What is a shutter? Well, you should know this because we talked about it when we learned the parts of the camera. But it's a mechanism in front of the imaging sensor that opens and closes. It's not the same as the aperture. When it opens, it exposes a sensor, or if we had film cameras, to the light that's coming in through the lens and the body. What is shutter speed? Shutter speed refers to how quickly the shutter opens and closes, exposing light to the sensor. Okay, that means, is it going to open quick, really quick, really quick, or slow, or super duper slow? Shutter speeds can be as long as several seconds, minutes, or hours, or as fast as 1/400th of a second, even faster on newer cameras. I'm not sure how fast ours go, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't do 1/4000th of a second. Imagine that your shutter is the faucet. How quickly you turn on the water and how quickly it turns off is the shutter speed, and how much water gets through would be like the light. Shutter speed is usually denoted on your camera as fractions of a second, or by real numbers followed by a closing quotation. So I told you before that you're going to have to learn a bunch of different numbers. The numbers that have an F in front of them, those are f-stops, right? That has to do with aperture. Shutter speed is always going to be in parts of a second. However, sometimes on the camera they look a little bit different, but it is fractions of a second or parts of a second. For instance, 1/800th of a second, 1/4 of a second, 1/2000th of a second, 2 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 hours. I know it sounds weird, but if you are on a really dark night, not in the city, out in the country, and you open up your shutter for a long time, you can follow, and there's not a cloud in the sky, you can follow and trace the stars, all right? So, tips. This is super important. This would be a quiz or test question. Most of the time you won't be shooting with a shutter speed slower than 1/60th of a second. And the reason, you guys, is that anything slower than that will be difficult without getting blurred images. That's why you have to have a tripod if it's less than 1/60th of a second. So it says right here, if you do decide that your shutter speed needs slower than 1/60th, you'll need to utilize a tripod. I just said that. Choosing the right shutter speed. When considering what shutter speed to use on an image, you should always ask yourself, is there anything in the scene that's moving, and how would you like to capture that movement? Do you want that movement to be blurred or frozen and still? Because that's going to help you decide how you want your shutter speed. For instance, 3 different photos taken of the same spinning pinwheel. Boy, that's a tongue twister. Each photo has a different shutter speed, okay? Look, the fast shutter speed that opens and closes really quick gets this almost stopped. So think of a bee's wings stopped or a hummingbird's wings stopped. It has to be super fast. Or a car driving by. It's got to be fast, all right? But this one, okay, so it has a slower shutter speed because, look, we see everything moving. And that would be the same as if you had an athlete and you could see them moving across the screen and you could see their movement. That would be a slower shutter speed. All right? Choosing the right shutter speed. To freeze an image in motion, it wouldn't be uncommon to use a speed upwards of 1/1000th of a second or faster, depending on how fast the object is moving. But I will tell you guys, you have to have the right amount of light to make that happen. Typically, you can't do that at night, all right? So the faster the movement, the faster your shutter speed will need to be in order to freeze it, right? On the other side, alternately, some images made at night with a tripod should be several hours long. I already said that. In order to get enough light on the image, that would be if you were filming the sky, right? These are referred to as, guess what? Long exposures. Come on, that sounds exactly right, doesn't it? Okay, fast shutter speeds. Fast shutter speeds enabled you to capture moments like water splashing, a football player catching a ball, without any motion blur. Again, you've got to have good light for that. The faster you set your shutter speed, the less time you'll be allowing light to hit your sensor. So in order to compensate for this, you'll need to open your aperture wider to let more in. Here is an example of a fast shutter speed. Notice the water, you can just see it. You can see the path. It almost looks frozen, right? But let's look at, I have another example in just a minute. But slower speeds, if you're really in a dark situation and can't open up your aperture, you need to have a long shutter speed to get enough light. With long exposures, you can do cool things, also like light painting, which we've done here before, and year 2 people, that's what I want you guys to work on. Star trails, I just talked about that, and more. Anything moving during your long exposure can end up as a blur in your photograph. So nighttime, a car driving by with its lights on. When shooting a slow shutter speed, always remember you've got to use a tripod. You can't do it at all. You can't even like set it on something and then push the button because you might jingle it right there. All right. Here's an example of a slower, I don't know what slower is, but a slower shutter speed. But notice it's that same picture from before, and look, it's blurry. We see the movement. It's blurred. We know they're the same picture from this one and this one, right? Here the water's frozen. Here the water's blurred, right? Don't forget about other parts of the triangle. We've already talked about aperture. Remember, if you want the big hole makes it so you can get a small depth of field. The small hole makes you be able to get the whole football field, but it's also not adding much light in. So we're going to learn about the third part, ISO, on another time, all right? But you'll have to learn how to compensate with those. So if you change your shutter speed to freeze a motion, example, from 1/250th of a second to 1/500th of a second, you'll be letting in less light, right? Because it's going faster. So in that case, you're going to have to either open up your aperture, like from f2.8, which we don't even have, to f2.0, which we don't even have, or up your ISO from 100 to 200. We haven't talked about ISO. We'll talk about that soon. Because you still have to have light come in order for you to get the right exposure. So here we go. Besides the fact that the above 2 pictures have different shutter speeds, also notice the depth of field is different, okay? This is like the pictures that we've recently taken or investigated online. This is due to the difference in aperture values, which we know, right? That we had to change the aperture on the ones that we've recently taken, and we've got the background in blur. But in order to get this frozen, you had to change the shutter speed, which also means you had to change the aperture, and that made the background blurry. So shutter priority mode, DSLR cameras have a mode that allows the user control to just control the shutter speed, and the camera automatically does the other things. And most of the time it's called TV mode, but sometimes it's called M mode or S. So it's TV or S for shutter, M mode, right? This is aperture, S, M for all of them. So we'll learn how to use all of them soon, but we're not quite there yet. So another thing that I wanted to just share with you about the shutter speed would be that it changes it from light to dark. Shutter speed alters the amount of time that the light is exposed to your image sensor. A long shutter speed lets light in for a long time and blurs motion. A fast shutter speed lets light in for a brief moment and freezes motion. And the fastest shutter speed at which you should shoot without a tripod is, test question, 1/60th of a second. I have one more thing on your handout, and it's a human eye. And the thing that the shutter would be, like the human eye, would be your eyelid. So if your eyelid blinks really quickly, the light gets in quickly. If your eyelid blinks very slowly, more light gets in. Or if you leave your eye open and don't blink at all, you got a lot of light coming in. All right? Well, I love you. Miss you already. Go out and change your world for the better. Looking forward to what we're going to do next. Take care. Bye-bye.